Hi, and welcome to a tutorial on doing your stitching for your worry pet. So the first thing that we're going to do is take our fabric. So your fabric is going to have two sides. One of the sides we're going to have on the outside, which is going to be a little fuzzier, and then the side that's going to be on the inside, which is going to have just a flatter finish. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is fold our piece of cloth in half so that the inside of the cloth is actually on the outside right now. So we're going to do the stitching on the inside so that when we flip it inside out, the stitches will be hidden, which is pretty awesome. So the next thing we're going to do, which I've already done, is we want to create a pattern to follow for the stitching. So for me, I kept it to about the size of my fist. I just did a circle, so I just did a large bottle and traced around the bottom of it. You can do a can, or you can do other shapes, but the more complex the shape, such as a star or having lots of jagged edges, it's just going to make it a more complicated stitching experience. So the simpler the shape, the easier the stitching, particularly if you're new to this, which I am. So I kept it to a circle. So the next thing that we're going to do, once we've made the mark, and you can kind of see it on this, I just used a black Sharpie to get that in there, but you can use any color that'll show up. So once we have the mark, we're going to be doing a sewing stitch known as a back stitch. So with the needle and thread that you have, it should already be threaded and it should already have a knot at the bottom, so you should be ready to go in that respect. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to start on that bottom and go through both pieces of fabric so that the needle comes out along that line that we drew. And then we're going to pull the string all the way through. And then the next thing we're going to do, we want to keep our stitching as even and consistent as possible. So for this, we want to keep the stitch size right around the size of a grain of rice, so pretty small. So once we kind of get that stitch size along our outline that we drew on the fabric, we're going to go and then we're going to pull that through. And again, consistency with the stitch size is going to be important. Sort of the smaller the stitch, the tighter the seam will be, and that'll keep all our stuffing in a lot better. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go on the bottom, and we're going to come back up, and again trying to keep that stitch size to about a grain of sand. But as you're going to probably see with my stitching, it's going to be slightly uneven. So we're going to come back out, pull the thread tight, and then you can see from the last stitch to where I just came out, there's a gap. So this is where the back stitch gets its name. So we are going to go back through that hole that we just made on the previous stitch, go through, and then we're going to pull the thread nice and tight. And now you can see that that gap has been covered up by the stitch. And then we're going to repeat that same process that we just went through. We're going to go up, and again on this back side we're going to go up, you know, again trying to keep it to the size of about a grain of rice. My rice might be a little bigger than yours. And then again, you can see that there's a gap between that previous stitch and where our thread just came up. So we're going to go right back through that previous stitch, creating that back stitch, so that again it creates a single unified line. And then we're going to come back up, pull it through, And you know, as you can see, my stitches are gonna be a little uneven. They're gonna be not exactly perfect to following the pattern that we have. Just periodically check to make sure that you're keeping the fabric folded in half and that the needle is going through both pieces of fabric. So you don't have to undo what you've already stitched. Next, we're going to take the shape and we are going to cut around the outside of what we've stitched. Remember, keeping that open spot, and you want to keep about 1/4 inch of fabric around the stitching that you've done. You don't want to cut it too close and have the possibility of cutting into your stitching. So we are just going to cut just about 1/2 inch around the outside of what we have stitched. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're just going to fold this inside out. Okay, and the next thing that we're going to do is, and you still have your thread attached, but now we're going to go ahead and turn this inside out. And we're going to go about putting the eyes in and stuffing it, and then also creating that final stitching to close out the bag. So there you have the bag. The next thing we're going to want to do is take our eyes, find a good placement for them, and then I'm just going to cut 2 little spots in the fabric, just small holes that make it easier to attach the eyes. And then in those spots, you're going to poke your eyes through. Poke the eyeball through. And then you can kind of turn it around. And then you're going to push on the little safety seals that keep the eyes nice and locked in place. And then you're going to do another eye. Okay, now that we have the eyes situated on our worry pet, we're going to want to put in the filling, which in this case is going to be rice. But you can use stuffing if the rice that's included isn't exactly how you want to have the worry pet feel. You know, I've just kind of put together a little funnel out of some scrap, and so you can kind of just put that in that opening that we kept, and then you're just going to add the rice. Could get a little messy, but the rice should be relatively measured out, but you can put in however much you feel like would be a good consistency for your worry pet. And then once we have the rice in the worry pet, we're going to finish the final stitching and give our worry pet a little try. Okay, once we have our filling in, we're going to want to close that final opening. The first thing we're going to do is fold down the 2 edges so that we have kind of a nice seam there. You should have enough thread left to finish the stitch with the whip stitch. This is what they call a whip stitch. So right now my final stitch on the inside was coming towards me, so I'm gonna do the first of the whip stitches going from front to the back of the worry pet. And then you want to pull that nice and tight, and then you're gonna just bring it back over the top. Again, similar to the previous stitching, we want to keep the stitches relatively small and tight so that our rice filling doesn't come spilling out. So you're going to keep going from the front to back in this case. And you're going to kind of keep the stitches relatively close together. So again, the filling doesn't come out. I'm trying to keep them to about a pretty close stitch. And then as you can see, you want to pull each of the stitches nice and tight until you've got that full opening closed. Okay, so we've got our closing all stitched up with the whip stitch, and now we want to tie off the whip stitch. So what we're going to do, I'm going to basically go through the last stitch that I just made, and I'm not going to draw it totally tight, and then I'm going to take my needle and then I'm going to go between those last couple of stitches and come back up. And then I'm going to leave a little loop. So you can see the thread is in a little loop right now. And then I'm going to go through that loop with the needle. And then I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And then the last thing we're going to do is kind of go through that little seam there that we just created. And then I'm going to just bring the needle out, about a ½ an inch below that. And now, at that spot where we just took the needle through, we're just going to cut the thread off. And there we have our worry pet. Now again, I am not a master sewer, but the worry pet, that's not what we're gonna have, that's not what we want to be worrying about.